In short, I don't benefit financially from either love or hate towards this show, and certainly not Disney Lucasfilm, but I have been invested in Star Wars emotionally since 1983. So as the lifelong, since childhood, and we're talking the early 80s, Star Wars fan that I am, an OG fan, it would be remiss of me to completely overlook the nuclear fallout which has been the Acolyte. I say fallout because whether you really love this show or you really hate this show, the one thing that you can't say is it's been uneventful in pop culture since its release. I wanted to let the smoke and the dust settle a little bit before I weighed in, at least on camera anyway, where I will say, what I will say is I don't hate this show, and I certainly don't love it either. I would never have thought I'd find myself this indifferent about Star Wars, truth be told. To me, it just is kind of there. It's kind of meh. It has elements that have been visually cool and interesting, particularly episode 5 with that, spoiler alert, epic lightsaber fight, which actually was entertaining as it was ridiculous, and episode 6 with some of its perspective shift and character development. Better late than never, right? But the legwork leading up to that episode was subpar, from storytelling decisions and beats which didn't make sense to characters that I felt nothing for, especially when they bit the dust. Sorry, Jackie and Yord. Now, I was really looking forward to the Acolyte way back when it was announced back at Star Wars Celebration. The idea of a series set earlier in the timeline than any Star Wars live action show to date, to this day, absolutely excited me. It had me chomping at the bit for it. And of course, my favourite characters are the Jedi. At least they were pre-The Last Jedi. So a show about pre-Phantom Menace, prequel-era Jedi, and a potential rise of a sinister secret Darksider? You had me at hello. But it seems like we have different expectations from about a show featuring Jedi who, over the years, let's face it, have gone from the flawed but deeply heroic order of samurai-inspired space monks with laser swords to basically something out of the West Wing, with all the political machinations, the stink of corrupt institutions, and conspiratorial cover-ups. Yay! Don't you just hate it when the real world creeps into a galaxy far away? My country, Britain, and the USA are going through enough political shenanigans right now during an election cycle, so I was kind of looking forward to a planet to get away from it all. If I wanted to escape real-world socio-political commentary, then I guess I watched the wrong show here. Though more subtle overall in places than its worst critics say, it still is as subtle as a lightsaber in the gut, even if that's not so fatal these days. Yeah, we know institutions and religions can be corrupt and abuse people. Enough already. Now, with respect, some of the platforms online with the loudest voices, the critical drinkers, the Midnight's Edge, who I like these guys, have made some valid points, and I found their general appraisal on the current state of Hollywood very resonant and interesting over the years to this day. But I do worry that, like the world of politics right now, both in the UK and the US, you have to pick a side and double down, and it's incredibly divisive. After investing so much in what's gone wrong at Disney Lucasfilm, was there ever going to be a scenario where these vocal online critics were going to give it a pass, let alone a glowing review? That's still not to say that they are light years off base, though, with their feedback. My initial thoughts about the Acolyte, as it relates to the fallout around it, I'm very Jedi about the show in that I have zero emotional attachment to it whatsoever, neither love or hate. That leads to the dark side. If anything, I would be, I guess, what some EU fans would call a grey Jedi, or an independent Force user who's simply done with all this OTT culture war bullcrap around the franchise. Oh, in true splinter in my butt fence sitting fashion, I would say that there is obvious propaganda on both sides of the Acolyte's reaction. both of them fanning the culture wars at this point. In the blue corner, you have the Lucasfilm progressives, who didn't do themselves any favours from the jump with this project, from press interviews where Leslie Headland, the showrunner, expresses her desire to express queer themes and personal explorations in the very expensive galaxy far, far away, and quotes from head honcho Kathleen Kennedy herself, preemptively calling out misogynistic fans who make up apparently a large proportion of the male fan base. As well as the jokes about 3PO and R2's sexual orientation and the diss tracks from series lead Amanda Stenberg. They saw some backlash coming and clearly they were prepared for it, even provoking it. Now in the red corner, you have the YouTube pundits with incredibly large audiences and influence who are the sworn enemy of much of modern left-leaning Hollywood, but especially Disney Lucasfilm. The harshest critics would call many of these channels grifters in that they make a living off of hating on this iteration of the franchise and its gatekeepers through ad revenue, but that shouldn't negate their arguments and criticisms. They're not just observing a train wreck, they're eagerly looking for it. The problem is when you have that bloodthirst that you see shots where they're not even taken. Okay, let's talk about Amanda Stenberg's comments. Some of you may be thinking, because she's black, I'm going to stick up for Amanda. If that's you, you're part of the problem, my friend, because you'd be incorrect. I'm sticking up for her because her infamous comments on the Daily Show with Trevor Noah, where she stated that she wanted white people to cry, had zero to do with the Acolyte, as it was one from an episode of the Daily Show that aired in 2018, where long before the Acolyte was conceived, where she was talking about her movie, The Hate You Give, which was about a young black male who died during a routine stop and search with a police officer. And two, the wanting white people to cry was related to said film in terms of an audience having empathy, not antagonizing them. Hate all you want on this project, but the way YouTubers ran with this fake news was irresponsible. Could the same ethos she spoke to be applied to the thinking behind the creators of The Acolyte, who were left-leaning? Sure. But don't misconstrue content to create a false narrative. That's fake news. Now, onto Star Wars lore. Episode 5 introduced a deep cut to the mainstream live-action world from the once-dismissed EU material, which is creeping back in. The lightsaber-cancelling metal, Portrayals. This created a what the amongst even fans who have slept on the EU, me being one of them, but a quick dig around Wikipedia validated the move. It will be explained in the next episode, but between then, this moment added to the pile of charges that the show was continuously breaking canon. I'm someone who is not digging this show for various reasons, but picking nits that aren't really there, it's a bit much. Case in point number 2. The way some of these pundits were talking about the breaking of the law in the Acolyte episode 3. The ones with the space witches having a rave and that earworm song, you know, The Power of 1 and 2. After watching the episode, critique didn't make any sense. Should we go into the Mundi thing? Okay. How he knowing about the Sith breaks canon, except that he doesn't know about the Sith? As far as he knows, at that point, there's just a rogue Padawan with maybe a rogue disgruntled Jedi Master running around. That's all. But the Sith were extinct for a millennia. Clearly not, which is evidence in the Phantom Menace. The fact is that the Sith were around for a millennia. They just weren't known to be around for a millennia. The episode didn't establish that there was a Sith anyway, but obviously there have been rogue Jedi before. You heard of the Lost 20? That was referenced to in Attack of the Clones? There have been Jedi who've fallen to the dark side in the past, and there are those who just left. Not everyone passes the Jedi trials, so you've got a lot of potential Force users with grudges hanging around the galaxy. Mundi, the secret safe with him. The secret safe from him. But this is an example if you made a thoroughly entertaining, beloved show. No one would care about these little discrepancies. This show makes itself vulnerable to these endless nitpicks because it takes itself so seriously, but not hitting a home run with the writing. It's like when you don't like someone and you're taking the opportunity just to about them every opportunity you have and about everything that person says, you complain to someone about them, even when they're doing something right. They'll say something, oh, I didn't like the way they said that. You're exaggerating things because you've decided you don't like them. And I think that's the same with this show. For many of its haters, the grudge is really with Kathleen Kennedy and crew, compounded over time with interest. Speaking of which, it does seem that the head honcho at Lucasfilm is keen to change the demographics of the famous IP, and in pretty aggressive fashion. She has continuously talked about female directors and focus on characters and representation, which is common in today's industry. Not saying that people shouldn't be represented, but we're used to stars being made from someone's personal vision and perspective, not a committee or a corporate one, which is all about what the market dictates. Lucas famously stuck out his middle finger, even when fans hated the direction of the prequels, me being one of them at the time, because he was carrying out his personal creative vision. I get it now, though I didn't back then. Lucas was telling an epic story, but it seems everyone else is commenting on the real world through the skin of Star Wars and it being a huge IP. Kind of like a Trojan horse to enter into the culture at the most populist level. For me, it is less about the optics of representation, be it racial, gender, sexuality, etc. I don't get into Star Wars for that. But the ideological shift from universal right and wrong and mythic storytelling. The point of myths is that they are a grand way of telling truthful stories that can be relatable and resonant universally. They shouldn't be localized or very much of the time and specific, otherwise you lose the epic nature in the telling. If all the good guys are either secretly bad guys or corrupt at worst, inept at best, then you're limiting your story and moral compass. What kid would want to be a Jedi now? Episode 3, for example, was incredibly painful to watch, with its power of one, power of two, power of many earworm song. And I'm not comfortable with this overemphasis on witches all of a sudden. It's clearly a stand-in for liberated women with power, but why that particular trope? Remember Leia? Young girls should want to be Jedi, but instead they want to be Fred using witches, apparently. I'm going to do a video about the religion of Disney Star Wars, or the dislike of religion in Disney Star Wars, because it seems that they're really pushing the idea of Force users who are not part of any kind of dogma or institution, which is a roundabout way of saying that religions suck, and you can be spiritual but not religious. Even witches, who probably haven't had the best PR throughout the ages, to be fair. But you could argue for some good reason. Traditionally, the concept of witchcraft is the idea of doing what the heck you want and being able to manipulate people and situations. Sounds like a Sith Lord to me. My understanding, and I'm not the one who's the sharpest when it comes to the EU, but my understanding of Star Wars Galaxy history is that there were these epic galactic wars, Sith wars, when dark-side Force users controlled the galaxy, enslaving all beings, and it took the rise of the Jedi, or the Jedi, to free the galaxy, and then they had to keep things in check. So the idea of this whole who gets to have power thing? Yeah, historically, for pretty good reasons. Because you had nightmare Force-using maniacs roaming throughout the galaxy, enslaving everyone. I mean, look what happened with just one Palpatine, or two, the rule of two, Palpatine plus Vader. Can you imagine a whole army of those dudes? Have you played Knights of the Old Republic? So, the way it kind of is positioning the Jedi as villains, so far, it doesn't really check out. Because even if, as strongly implied, Sol and his crew massacred the witches, I'm pretty sure, judging by some of the clips in the trailers, they've done that whole mind control black eyes thing. I think they kind of probably got what was coming, which leads me to my highlights of the Acolyte. There are some. Master Sol, both the character and the performance. I can't believe that the actor learned English, especially for this part. I feel he's outstanding. It's such a shame that his great performance will be overshadowed by the negative fallout from the show. But hopefully, like Qui-Gon Jinn standing out amongst the negative buzz surrounding the Phantom Menace back in '99, I was there. It's not a beloved movie like it is now. Hopefully, he'll be remembered fondly in the archives of the Jedi. That also leads me to the episode 5 fight with Smilo Ren. And I won't lie, Quamir, aka The Stranger, Sith Bro, Smilo Ren, played by Manny Quinto, he was great. Even though you could see Swiss coming from space, but that action, kind of got me goosebumping. It was a bright spark moment. I give it credit for that where it's due. And the Jedi murder spree, wow. That was a major swing taken, particularly around Yor's neck. Too soon? Right after killing Padawan Jeki, which was a huge surprise, I just wish I'd cared about both of them before they became one with the Force. And admittedly, if I had small kids, and my kids were into Star Wars when they were small, I don't think I could have shown them that episode, which leads to my lowlights. I don't care about any character but Sol. Even that is due to the actor. And I especially don't care about the twins, which is problematic as they are the lead characters, you know? Up to episode 3, the show has been incredibly slow and underwhelming. Even A New Hope, which is epically slow at the start of that movie by today's standards, was world building and introduced you to new things at the time. So you were able to go on the ride however long it took. But this show doesn't capitalize on the excitement and opportunity of a new untapped Star Wars era, the first time in live action, completely outside of the Skywalker saga. And it just feels incredibly pedestrian. The worst setting for a very personal story that could have been explored in another known era, especially if you're not going to capitalize on either the time or the setting. The Acolyte is too unsubtle and too personal for such an expensive show and universal IP made with such an incredibly high budget that feels like an RPG fan fiction film. And it just doesn't make sense. So all you had to do was land the plane and deliver what you promised in an interesting, exciting and novel way. And unfortunately, as much as Headland is a fan, I can see that she has a love for some of the EU and all of that and genuinely loves Star Wars. But just because you're a fan of something doesn't qualify you to make it. I love me a 5-star meal, but I couldn't make you one. I ain't no Gordon Ramsay. And she's got all the ingredients there, but they just didn't gel because she's no George Lucas. So I'm disappointed. And considering the cost of this show and all the hype around it, you really needed to deliver big. Remember those choose your own adventure books? Star Wars Disney is now this. No longer a unified story by one creative genius, but a sandbox IP for people to play in, akin to fan fiction. More democratic than it was under Lucas, but doesn't feel like Star Wars underneath the skin. I'm so happy that so many Star Wars fans are loving it and want you to not love it. I wish I was one of them. But for me, the definition of it being a failure is not because of what the hardcore haters are saying exclusively. And again, I personally think some of them are going way too far. Yes, is there an agenda? Absolutely. Leslie Headland came out and said it herself that she wanted to make a very queer story in a galaxy far, far away. Which, though great for representation, if you're going to use a multi-million-dollar franchise, billion-dollar franchise, to cater to particular audiences that are not universal, I feel you're going to get this kind of pushback. And you're going to lose a lot of money because Star Wars is meant to be a universal, global, cross-generational franchise that appeals to everyone. China to Timbuktu, from baby boomer to Xenial. It's a lot of money to spend for something that doesn't hit all those boxes. But take the message to one side and the real-world social agenda and progressivism out of it, and you still got a story that wasn't very cleverly told with very wooden acting. And it just feels bland. It doesn't raise the bar, and it just feels like expensive fan fiction. Maybe it's protected and propped up by all this progress talk. The days when fans would imagine their own version of a Star Wars story set in a galaxy far, far away have come true. But clearly, the Imaginers are not qualified like Lucas, and let's be honest, old school 70s, 80s Lucas, to tell it. What excited me originally when Disney bought Lucasfilm and the idea of different creators playing in that sandbox was the expansion of stories and creativity. Now I feel this is the problem, because I've come to the realization that Star Wars is George Lucas. Good, bad, and ugly. It's just in his DNA. Without him, it just kind of feels like dress up. And someone will come with, what about Andor? Yeah, what about Andor? Andor was a great show. But are you honestly telling me it was a great Star Wars show? I.e., if you changed the context, would that show still not have been great? It would have been. Besides, the showrunner Tony Gilroy and the creators were very not interested in Star Wars and the Star Warsian aspects at all. So it's a bit difficult to call it quintessential Star Wars when it doesn't really embrace the campness, the kookiness of the franchise, right? It's like they went out of their way to make it as little Star Wars as possible, except for the surface. But then you go to the other end of the spectrum, maybe a Book of Boba Fett, quoting Robert Rodriguez, and it really does feel like someone playing with their toys, their action figures, with a big budget. And that doesn't really work either. The best balance for me so far has been The Mandalorian, at least seasons 1 and 2, where it feels genuinely authentically Star Wars, yet it's telling its own story in a very clever and smart way. The last danger I fear with where Star Wars is heading in terms of the shows, where the Acolyte has set a precedent, is this whole adult R-rated territory. The Acolyte is not exactly R-rated, but it's not for kids. Put it this way, my teenagers watched it, but I wouldn't have been showing it to them if they were small. Some of the violence and inferences are one thing, but the murky morality is another, and the general dark grimness. The idea of there not being really a light side or a dark side, but just this murky grey in between. Personally, I took Lucas at his word that Star Wars was for 12-year-olds, that it was a kooky, corny morality play in a cool, grand space opera setting. Throw in a bit of Arthurian legend, a bit of Western and samurai. It was never meant to be that deep or serious, but we grew up. But rather than like what I tend to do, look back at Star Wars in a sense of nostalgia and feel like a little kid again, people want to drag it into adulthood. They want to drag the property into 21st century sensibilities. They don't want to throw back yesteryear fairy tale franchise. They want Zack Snyder, gritty in space Rebel Moon. You know, sex and drugs in space. Yay! So, the Acolyte's biggest crime? It's extremely mid. If it was a Jedi, it would be the Mundi of the Order. Sorry, Mundi fans. And if he was keeping the events of this show secret for 100 years, like him, I wish Lucasfilm had followed suit and kept this a secret, because I'm not sure we needed to see this one. So there's going to be a few more videos from me about Star Wars, because I need the money. But for now, that's my short take on the Acolyte and the fallout. Let me know what you think in the comments below. In the meantime, may the Force be with you if you're still watching.